I found when we come to these events, we talk a lot about scaling. We talk about how to scale our business, how to scale our products, how to scale our company. But one of the things I've realized we don't probably talk quite enough about is how to scale ourselves as founders, as entrepreneurs, as early executives in a company so that we can stay on the journey for as long as we want to. When I first joined Lucid about 10 years ago in the basement, we had a working version of our first product, Lucid Chart. We had 4 employees, about 10,000 registered users, and about $1,000 in total revenue. If you fast forward to today, we're the leader in visual collaboration software. We have more than 1,000 employees globally, 60 million registered users, and hundreds of millions in revenue. And so just as we've had to adapt and evolve and grow the business over that decade, so too has it been necessary for me and others on the journey to adapt, evolve, and to grow so that we can stay with the business throughout that time. And so today I want to share a few of those lessons that I've learned along the way that hopefully are helpful to you so that you have that optionality to stay on the journey for as long as you want to. The first one of that would be to execute on what really matters. In the early days, our greatest contribution is really our ability and willingness to execute. When I first joined Lucid, my title was VP of Operations and Strategy. But at that stage, the only strategy that really mattered was growing, acquiring users, making them successful, and then, of course, monetizing and growing. And so I remember my first day, the founder came to me and said, "We need new pricing." And I said, "Great. I can nail this." I'd just come from a big consulting firm where I worked with Fortune 500 companies. I'd done a big, complex pricing case study over multiple months. I knew how to do this. And so I started developing my plan. And then 2 days later, that founder came back to me and said, "What do you have for us?" And caught a little bit off guard by how quickly he was expecting results. I sort of fumbled and said, "Well, give me till Friday. I'm still wrapping up a few things." And I took the next 48 hours and did some basic benchmarking against peers and competitors. I thought about our value proposition and basically came up with some pricing and packaging, which I pitched to our founders that Friday. They liked it. We launched it the next week, and it became our pricing for the next 4 or 5 years, as we grew and passed 10 million in ARR and beyond. Once we had that out of the way, I knew that we had to acquire users. If we had a great product, it wouldn't matter if no one was using it. And so I started trying to figure out how were we going to grow. And I looked at companies that were a little bit bigger than us, and I saw all the various marketing channels that they were doing, all the interesting events or videos or other things, and it was a little overwhelming. And then I started to hone in on what would really matter for us. And I focused on SEO and content. And it started to work. And then I doubled down again, and it continued to work. And I doubled down again. Along the way, sort of ignoring all the shiny objects and focusing on what really mattered. There are a few things you can focus on this week, this month, this quarter, that will still matter a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now. And so I would challenge you to think about that. Actually, take some time to reflect on your last week, your last quarter, and where did you spend your time? And is it on the things that will really matter and still be relevant as you grow over the next months and years from now? In a startup, we often have to make a lot of decisions, often with no data or imperfect data. And so my next piece of advice is to train your gut to help you be able to make all those decisions along the way. Sort of like a machine learning model. You train with that data, and then it can give you great predictive outcomes on the other side. For me, in the early days, I did that through a couple of ways. First, quantitatively. Every day, of course, we had metrics and dashboards for the most important things in the business. And every day I would start my day by reviewing those and understood what changed. How was the previous day? How was the previous week? What were the new trends that were emerging? And I would ask a couple questions about why to really understand what was going on in the business. And I did that day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out. At the same time, from the qualitative perspective, I was Lucid's first customer support rep. Because every time we had enough money to hire another person, we hired another engineer. And so we got to the point where it was about 20 or 25 engineers and me. And so for those first couple of years, I answered every support ticket, along with a lot of other responsibilities. And even when we got to the point where we could hire people to help answer more of those customer support tickets, I kept reading them. And I read them for years, every single day. And I estimate that over those first few years, I probably read about 100,000 customer support tickets. And it gave me so much feedback and signal from our users and customers on what was working and what wasn't. What did they love about the product? What friction were they experiencing? How was our pricing resonated? What did they want next? And so the combination of both the quantitative and qualitative data helped train my gut. And what it allowed me to do was have the confidence and the credibility to be able to participate in just about every key operational and strategic decision across the business. So train your gut. The next one, obviously, as we start to grow, we move from individual contributor to player coach, and eventually a full-fledged manager. And we all know that growing a team is important. But as you do so, I'd encourage you to be deliberate. And specifically with a focus on high-impact people doing high-impact work. I remember as we got to that point where we were finally going to hire someone on my team. And by that point, I was pretty burned out. I was carrying a lot of responsibilities, putting in a lot of hours, and I was ready to hire someone. And so as we started talking to people and interviewing, we interviewed a candidate. And afterwards, the founder and I were talking, and he asked me the question, is he great? And I said, well, I think he's good, and he's available, and he can start today, and I need the help. And we had this discussion back and forth for the next hour, and ultimately made the decision not to hire that person. With the fundamental hypothesis, which has proven true, that the core nucleus that you hire in the early days is so critical. Great people want to work with great people. And so if you settle in the early days, you're going to be settling for the rest of your time building the company. And so never settle, particularly as you hire in those early days. Focus on those high caliber people. So we fast forwarded a year or so from then. Things were again getting very busy. It was time to hire someone else, I thought. And so I again had a conversation with my founder and CEO and pitched him on why we needed to make this hire. And he was inherently skeptical. And he said to me, why don't you take a few minutes and go write the OKRs, or goals for this person, of what they would do in their first 90 days of Lucid. And I was a little annoyed by this request. But I went back to my desk, I started pounding out the notes, and my pace quickly slowed. And as I started to evaluate what I had down on paper, I realized there wasn't actually that much of value. There was stuff that needed to be done, but there was not a lot of high-impact, needle-moving kind of things for the business. And so I made the decision, to stop doing some of those things and ultimately delay that hire until we had the right role. And so, again, be deliberate about high-caliber people doing high-impact work. If you fast forward a year or so after that, and the business was growing up and to the right, my scope was increasing, the team was growing, but I wasn't particularly happy. And I struggled to understand why, because everything seemed to be going well. And so as I reflected on that, I decided to go through the same exercise that I challenged you to do, where I went through and I analyzed, how was I spending my time? Where had I spent my time in the last week, in the last month, in the last quarter? And what I found was I was spending a lot of time on recruiting because we were hiring and growing a lot as a company. I was spending a lot of time on people and project management because I had a relatively junior team, and so on and so forth, and realized I was not spending much time on the things that really gave me energy, which is the key strategic questions and big opportunities for the business. And so as I thought about that, I had a candid conversation, again, with the CEO and founder. And we decided to make a few changes. At that point, he and I were interviewing every final round candidate across the business. But you know what? 98% of the time, we agreed. I didn't need to do that anymore. And so, I stepped out of those, and he continued doing that. We elevated a couple people to be managers and take some of that load off of my plate personally. And we made these changes over a couple of months to allow me to get back to where I was most excited, on those big strategic questions and problems for the business. And so it taught me that as we optimize the business as we grow, we also have to optimize our role. With a key focus on that sort of trifecta of what does the business need, what gives you the most satisfaction or energy, and what are you uniquely qualified to do. I was a competent recruiter and competent people manager, but what I was uniquely qualified to add was on those big strategic questions for the business. Around that same time, the founder and I had a discussion, and we were envisioning what kind of company we wanted to be in the next few years. And up until that time, I had ran marketing, and I had done a pretty good job of it. We had doubled every year, we'd attracted millions of users, things were going well. But as we looked forward at the company that we wanted to build, we realized we probably needed a different marketing leader. Someone who had experience in brand building and product marketing, working with sales teams, and so on. Those were not skills that I had yet developed. And so we made that decision and hired a great CMO. And the first day that he started, I essentially transitioned 70% of the team that I had recruited and built and developed over to him and his stewardship. At the same time, I transferred over most of the initiatives that I had been leading up until that point. And around that time, I read an article about giving away your Legos, which gives this analogy that when building a company, it's like sitting in front of a table of Legos, and you start to build toward your vision. But eventually you realize to build better, to build faster, you need to invite other people to the table to build with you. And so you recruit and you hire them, and they sit at the table with you, and you have to give them some of your Legos, some of your responsibilities and initiatives and things that you've been responsible for up until that point so that they can start building and be successful. That's what I did on that day. And it led to interesting questions, right? When you do go through that process, you think, what if they can't do it as well as I've done it? Or maybe more interestingly, what if they do it far better than I've done it? And so the next couple of months was a little bit of reflection and reevaluation process for me, understanding what would my role be moving forward and where could I add the most value. Now, over the years, I've gotten a lot more comfortable giving away my Legos because I've done it lots and lots of times now. But it's a critical part of scaling with a company, particularly in a high-growth environment. Okay, a couple last ones here. As you think about the process of scaling, all the way up, oftentimes we can brute force our way. It's tough, but we can brute force our way to the first $1 million in ARR. We can often then get creative and continue to scale to 10 million in ARR. But then to really go to 100 million in ARR or $1 billion in ARR, which is our next milestone and goal, you really have to develop and build the machine. And it starts from the top. It starts with first being able to clearly articulate your mission, your why. Can you cast the vision and inspire people, your employees, your customers, and others to get excited and rally around that mission with you? Next, the strategy. The what you're going to do to win. And can you ensure that everyone in the company, and at least particularly key leadership, can articulate the same cohesive and coherent vision so that you are truly aligned on what you're doing? Next, the people, the who. Constantly recruiting and developing and up-leveling the talent in the organization to get you there. And finally, the processes, the how. Are you thinking about how they can be scalable and repeatable so that you can do double what you're doing today, triple, 10 times what you're doing? That's the kind of machine you have to build as you continue to scale. And at that stage, while we continue to roll up our sleeves and be personally involved, one of the key things about that stage is then coming from learning to lead and communicate and align and drive accountability, all the things required to get the best out of our people and our team as you continue to scale and build. Now, my last tip applies for the whole journey. And as many of you probably know, it's easier said than done. But don't burn out. And as we all know, building a company is a roller coaster. It has high highs and it has low lows. And so not burning out, right? Not letting that cloud your judgment so that you decide maybe to step off the ride a little too early is critical. For me, there's a couple of things that I've done along the way. First is understanding what are my non-negotiables. No matter how crazy things are in the business, no matter what chaos there may be going on, what are the things that I'm not going to sacrifice in my life? And so, for example, my team knows that if my son has a soccer game, I'm going to do everything I can to be there. I'm going to rearrange my schedule. I'm going to take calls from the car if I need to. I'm going to get back online later. But when the whistle blows, I'm present and I'm there for him. Because I've realized that being there for those special moments and even some of the mundane moments with my family and with my kids is what helps me find and keep that balance amidst all the chaos that may exist. Now, with non-negotiables, you can't have very many of them, otherwise they become negotiable. But what are your non-negotiables? The other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, but it comes back into play here, is ensuring that you recruit a phenomenal team around you. For the first few years of Lucid, I felt the personal responsibility of the number, right? Of our revenue, of our growth. And that became tiring. Month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year. And over time, we were able to recruit a great team who were incredibly capable at what they did, but they were also willing to shoulder that load, that responsibility. And so that I no longer felt like I was doing that alone anymore, but had a fantastic team who was unified and aligned and together in that goal. And so as you think about the journey, I would encourage you to figure out what are your non-negotiables and how do you recruit the best team around you and be willing to share the load with them so that you don't burn out along the way. And so finally, in summary here, as you think about how to scale yourself, right? These tips on executing on what really matters, training your gut, growing the team deliberately, optimizing your role, giving away your Legos, building the machine, not burning out. Hopefully at least one of those resonates with you today. So you can take a step forward in scaling yourself as you continue to scale your business, your company, and your opportunity. Because if you can do that, it gives you the optionality. It preserves your choice of when you want to be on the journey versus when you want to step off. And if you can't do that, sometimes the business can pass you by. And so be deliberate about scaling yourself as much as you are about scaling all the other parts of your company and journey. And with that, thank you and good luck. Okay, I think we've got a question up front.
What is one of the more contradictory or rather advice that you felt that most people get that did not quite work for you, that did not apply to your personal scalability, that, a lot of so I'm just looking for...
Yeah, so the question was, what sort of advice that is common, but maybe, was contradictory or didn't pan out for me sort of in terms of scaling myself. For me, it's probably that I've always been a generalist. I never actually developed sort of deep capabilities in any one area. My prior, job before coming to Lucid was a consultant. And really, what I learned from that were two things. How to break down hard problems, hard, ambiguous problems, because a startup is just full of hard, ambiguous problems, and how you bring analytics or data, to bear when you can. And so that combination allowed me as a generalist to run at marketing, to run at sales, to run at product, lots of different things, even though I didn't always have the domain skill set. And because I was investing in training my gut along the way, again, it gave me that confidence and credibility to hang with all the other people who maybe had deeper expertise on the technical side or the sales side or the finance side because I trained my gut and had some of those other capabilities. Good question.
That's great. All right, one more question.
Yeah. So as you build the mission and the strategy, how do you ensure and what are the leading indicators that it's working? There's not a meeting that goes by that I have with my team, whether that's my executive team, all the directors, the entire company, where I'm not talking about our mission and our strategy. Every meeting. And I imagine they might get a little bit tired of hearing about it, but it's so critical. And so, that's a common thing is we think we communicate enough when we communicate it once or twice. But as a leader, we have to over-communicate all the time. Second, of course, we use OKRs, and so we see that cascade. So ideally, teams can understand how is their work bubbling up and layering up to the most important work and the key things going on in the business. And third is we listen to employees a lot, whether that's through quarterly surveys or more informal methods, to understand, do they understand the mission? Do they understand the strategy? Do they feel attached to it or not? Because if not, that's my fault. And that's my job to fix. And there's always a lot to do on that, especially with 1,000 employees globally.
Excellent. Wonderful question. Dave, thank
you
so much
for
your time.
Everyone.